Last season, the highest ranked Venture player, Specs, ends up winning some stacked ass lobbies. But how? Venture's always been one of the least popular heroes, yet this guy is beating imported Koreans like Mag and Who Are You on a seemingly slept on hero. Let's find out why. One of the most interesting matchups has to be playing against Who Are You on the Tracer. Venture on especially narrow or enclosed maps has a pretty favourable matchup. A single direct is basically half of Tracer's HP, the splash damage makes it hard for Tracer to use cover, and it's tough to get that blink melee off because of that drill dash. As a result, a lot of the time, whenever Specs was fighting Who Are You, he was getting the better of him, commonly forcing out recall and making Who Are You's life pretty difficult. It's not even like you have to be hitting every shot either because of how squishy Tracer is. Breaking this down a bit more, after the Kiriko blows up, Who Are You technically has the jump on the Venture. In fact, Specs is around half HP with no cooldowns. However, a shot to the floor guarantees about 20 splash damage onto Who Are You, followed up with a nice direct and another splash shot. Because of this, Who Are You is forced to recall, living to fight another day. With all that being said, please don't get the impression that Tracer is a magical Tracer counter though. Looking back at that previous example, the area itself which Who Are You is fighting in is very enclosed, making it easy to land damage onto the Tracer. Comparably, if we look at the very first fight, Who Are You blinks over to the doorway and Specs doesn't actually duel Who Are You. This is because the extra distance and space that Who Are You has makes it dangerous for the Venture to actually chase him out. So what does Specs do in the first fight then? Well, it's the zone. Because of Burrow, Venture acts like a wedge between the front line, so the Winston and Tracer, and the back line, being the hit scans and supports. You can see Specs burrow in early, which prevents someone like the Ana from walking up and getting a good nade. As soon as he exits Burrow, he also dashes the Winston back into his team, which is critical for landing the kill. Not to mention, because Who Are You blinks in, it becomes easier for Specs to force him out. Zoning like this is borderline busted because it guarantees value. Ignore the Venture and they delete your backline, but focus them and your frontline gets deleted. In a fight afterwards, we see Specs force out the Tracer once again before quickly burrowing in to zone off the backline. Again, the Ana has to back up, making it less likely she's gonna hit a nade as fat as Pyro's inflation mods. Notice how Specs also strafes to the left in order to play the cover and hold the position. Most Venture players would have just burrowed in, then immediately dashed out, which isn't very efficient. Now, why would you want to hold here anyways? Well, because it sets up the Venture to punish anyone who walks past them. In this case, that's likely Zodial. This leads me on to the next idea of risk baiting, holding space in a way that forces enemies to expose themselves to risk if they want to dislodge you. Again, you can't ignore the Venture because they will one-shot you, but it's hard for Zodial to actually push the Venture because he'd be exposing himself to someone like the Ramatra. This is why Zodial and the rest of his team push wide to force out Specs because there's little exposure to risk. Here though, Specs is gonna hold his ground. He burrows in, zoning off the Ana, which is fairly standard. However, he then dashes to the doorway, popping his ultimate straight afterwards. This draws the attention from Zodial, stops the Ana from walking forwards, and baits the Winston in dropping off the high ground. Once Venture sees the Ana back off, he knows he's safe to dash forwards, catching the Winston and forcing Primal. Again, this is textbook zoning, drawing attention from the Sojourn Ana, allowing him and his team to punish the Winston. Now, let me draw your attention, yes I did write that awful joke in my script, to the Burrow itself. Yes, it does zone off the Ana a bit, but it's primarily used to stall the bots. Even though Specs loses the fight, because Hybrid just has that white boy aura, it doesn't actually matter that much. Specs almost gets the bot to the halfway point, making this fight loss not that deep. Next fight, we see him stall the bot yet again, immediately one-shotting the Sojourn the second he comes out of Burrow. Now you probably already know the one-shot combo, it's not that complex, but jump scaring one of the best European hit scans is not an easy task. On King's Row, Specs does this exact same Burrow and one-shots the Sojourn in a very similar fashion. But how does he make it look so easy? Well, part of it is down to the third person view in Burrow. Pretty obvious to mention, and I'm sure many of you Stadium players already know how much more information you get in third person. But the other part of it is downtime. Basically, whenever you're not doing something mechanical, you've got free time to think about your next move. When you're Burrowed as Venture, you're just vibing. You're not worried about mechanics. The same is true when you're deflecting as Genji, invisible as Sombra, or recoiling as Tracer. Use this downtime to think about your next move, you'll be able to sneak in some unexpected one-shots. Now, I kinda need to mention how broken Venture's Excavation perk is. On the surface, it doesn't seem groundbreaking, you just get your cooldowns back 4 times as fast. Basically, your dash and burrow go from 8 seconds down to 2 seconds. A nice buff, but the real game changer is your passive. You gain 75 shields when using either ability and Excavate, instead of just 30 shields. This means Specs is able to pull off some super aggressive Excavates and just tank through damage like he's the Armstrong meme. Venture literally becomes the tankiest DPS in the game, only beaten out by Bastion in his self-heal perk, but that's a major perk, and Bastion can't damage while healing. If you want to min-max the Excavate though, here's what Specs does. He pops the Excavate, shoots around, then he dashes to get the shields, Excavate again, killing the Kiriko, before burrowing out. Not to mention, he finishes the last 2 rounds of his Excavate safely, before once again getting the better of Who Are You. On King's Row, he pops 2 Excavate shots, dashes for those shields and to get closer, before finishing off the Ana with those last 2 Excavate shots. Then, he burrows away. Do note that, even if you burrow after you fire all your Excavate shots, you still get that 75 shields. So, generally, you want to interweave your dashes while you Excavate, and burrow at the end to escape out. Now, I kinda need to mention the elephant in the room, which is that Specs dies a lot. And I mean a lot. In fact, if you look at his profile, he's got a 66% win rate, yet he's got 10 deaths per 10. How is this even possible? Well, part of it is to do with how Specs prioritizes the objective. We did see just how massive controlling that bot was to minimize the impact of losing a fight. Pros have done this as well, and it's literally won them tournament games. Another part of it though, is that when Specs dies, he usually trades for it. You can see him diving the Ana, catching the kill, and sacrificing his life for it. Same thing with diving the Sojourn and Overclock. Now, does this mean that you should start trading in your games? No, because there's still one more factor, the cost of the trade. In most of the deaths that I saw, it took a lot to take down a Venture. Whether that was investing a Pulse Bomb and another Overclock, it was expensive and it hurt the enemy team's ult economy. Ultimates aren't the only cost though. Here, you can see Specs trade onto the Freya and die for it. Doesn't seem that costly, right? That is until you zoom out and see 2 other players come back and kill the Venture. Yazid is busy with his dick in his hand, wondering where the fuck his Kiriko is at. Listen, Slay, I know the Saudis didn't pay you, but no need to take out a mortgage to kill a Venture. To be clear, I don't recommend sacrificing your life like this because it is super risky and only works in ranked. Even Specs told me against coordinated teams, you never really see this. Of course, hero bans are the cherry on top this season, and Specs told me he pretty much always bans D.Va, Pharah and Kiri. All 3 of those heroes have the mobility to force you out from angles early on, while also having tools to avoid your damage. He mentions that Zyra Cass is more annoying but less oppressive, which makes sense. They've got a lot less mobility to force you out, and because they can absorb your dives a lot more, it just means you pressure more with your gun. You can kinda see what that looks like here, where Specs finishes his burrow on the high ground against the Brig Ana backline. If you watched my Nightmare video, you'll know how I talked about how tough it is for Brig Ana to clear flankers. The exact same thing applies here, where Specs has got an insane angle onto the Brig Ana, so instead of committing with draw dash, he just fires his shots from high grounds. The same kind of idea applies onto Cass. Lastly, I do want to show this funny kill onto Astro, again terrible joke. Specs just hides in the cinema at the start of the round, with Astro being none the wiser, getting blown up like Nightmare last week. Anyways, check out the Venture's Twitch if you want to see more of them down below, and check out the video on screen if you enjoyed this one. Until next time.